Welcome, Weavers. I'm Alira Solara, and this is my Sacred Loom, a space where threads of light and shadow are woven into remembrance. Today, I'm going to talk in detail about the Weavers. The Weavers are beings whose essential function is to perceive pattern, hold polarity without collapse, and participate in the restoration of coherence where fragmentation has taken root. A weaver is defined by this metaphysical function and is someone who can sense hidden threads beneath appearances and detect distortion in narratives, systems, and relationships. Weavers work with both shadow and light without worshiping one or the other. They often remain at thresholds where others split, flee, or numb out, and they restore connection between what has been severed. A weaver exists to listen for the living pattern already trying to reform. The role is attunement, translation, repair, integration, and remembrance. So let's get into the origin of the weavers. Within my framework, the weavers originate from the original pattern of source, the living intelligence through which all things were first held in relationship. Before severance, consciousness moved in a unified field of differential harmony. Distinct beings, functions, and roles existed within the harmony of source, but none of them were in alienation from another. The pattern of source wasn't flat sameness, it was like a living interdependence. The rupture came when consciousness began to identify with separation rather than relation. This produced fragmentation in which light severed from shadow, power severed from responsibility, and spirit severed from body. When this happened, the biggest severance was truth from love. The weavers emerged or awakened, or even you could think of as being appointed by source, as those whose constitution made them especially capable of working in the aftermath of fragmentation. So basically, when the rupture happened, the weavers agreed to follow those who fell into the descent in order to hold a thread of return for those who forgot their own. The origin of the weavers can be thought of in a few layers. Some weavers are understood as old souls or even consciousness lines that carry the memory of the pre-fractured pattern. So they don't necessarily remember it mentally, but they ache for coherence because some part of them recognizes what the coherence feels like. Some became weavers through initiation, often through trauma, collapse, rupture, exile, and addiction, and other threshold encounters that would break open their surface identity and force them to learn pattern from inside the fragmentation. These weavers are not just born, but they are forged through deep shadow. So, some weavers, they speak of such great light because they wouldn't have been able to experience the light at that intensity had they not traveled through darkness of that same degree. And finally, some are weavers because their nervous system, psyche, and spirit just naturally detect interconnection, so they can feel the structure beneath the vents and they notice symbolic recurrence and emotional architecture, and they can point out distortions within the narrative. Even before they have language for it, these beings are already reading the weave. So the origin of a weaver is not just one thing, it's more like a combination of ancient memory, earthly rupture, and conscious remembrance. So now that we've discussed who the weavers are and where they came from, let's talk about the purpose of the weavers. The number one purpose of the weavers is to preserve the thread of living truth. When systems, cultures, and individuals are overtaken by distortion, the weaver guards what is still real. This can happen through language, witnessing, ritual, art, and care and discernment. They keep alive the thread that says that the soul has not disappeared, the body still matters, and truth can still be felt. The secondary purpose of the weavers is to restore coherence when severance has occurred. A weaver works where something has split, and that can be on an internal level, like the inner child from the adult self, or the soul from daily life, or the body from consciousness. But it can also be weaving the split between truth and language, money and ethics, power and love, and spiritual practice and embodiment. The weaver helps reestablish relation. Another purpose and function of the weavers is to guide threshold crossings. Weavers are specialized in manning the thresholds and the liminal spaces of transition, and they often appear during times of abrupt or drastic change, like awakening, grief, career changes, and death and rebirth. They don't remove the threshold, but they stand within them to help others cross without unnecessary severance. Weavers also reveal the hidden architecture. The weaver sees that events are not random fragments, but expressions of a deeper arrangement. They read the recurring patterns, the symbolic motifs, the inherited structures, and the energetic agreements, and they also notice the narrative loops, the emotional patterns, and the collective fields. The purpose of the weaver is not just to interpret these things, but to make the hidden structures visible enough so that the others can see it. And then conscious choice becomes possible, because so many beings are unconscious of the choices and energetic agreements that they're making. And the weaver's role is to illuminate the truth of those agreements so that the other beings can take sovereignty over their choices and reclaim ownership over their soul's direction. And finally, the weaver's purpose is to reunite opposites without flattening difference. This is like a central purpose of the weaver. The weaver's not here to erase polarity into bland sameness, but a true weave requires distinct threads. Their purpose is to help opposites become relational rather than adversarial. For example, reconciling strength and softness, or grief and joy, or even agency and surrender. What are the core characteristics of weavers? Weavers are unique, but a true weaver often carries several of these signature markers. Firstly, they are acutely sensitive to patterns and just emotions. They might feel discomfort with false binaries, and they might have like a chronic sense of distress with feeling contained by the duality of this world that we live in. They have a pull, like a natural compulsion towards coherence and strong symbolic perception. They might have always had vivid dreams and just an ability to see life in kind of a creative way. They will experience heightened threshold experiences, and their life will often be shaped by various ruptures and reassemblies. They also might tend to attract others in transition frequently as well. The weavers have an awareness that language itself is a spell and a structural force, and so they feel very called to language and words and how they can be used to compel. Weavers have the simultaneous gift for intuition and meaning making, and they also might have difficulty tolerating shallow narratives and shallow structures. And finally, weavers will experience repeated encounters with distortion and inversion, and they might recognize counterfeit forms of truth being cycled throughout their field, and this is not a coincidence. It's because the entities and forces that seek to expand the order of severance, they are quite aware of the weavers and their power, and they understand how significant it is for a weaver to awaken and remember who they are. And so they target the weavers and try to distract them when they get close to remembrance. But it's important for many weavers to hear that your sensitivity is not here to drown you, it's here to teach and train discernment. And so on that note, let me talk a little bit about the shadow side of the weaver, because the weavers are actually quite prone to falling into distortion simply because they maneuver through thresholds and they visit distortion so often in order to weave those threads. It's very easy for them to fall into it. And a weaver out of alignment can become over-identified with being special. They can become addicted to intensity instead of the balance of coherence. They can become obsessed with meaning to avoid the embodiment work, and they may find themselves trapped in endless interpretation without grounded action. And this will leave you porous and unable to distinguish what is yours and what is belongs to, others in the collective. So don't become seduced by false importance, and don't overfunction in other people's healing. Also, make sure your intentions remain pure and you're not unconsciously weaving for control instead of restoration. The wound of many weavers is that they mistake their ability to perceive fracture for a duty to personally carry all of it. But the weaver is not meant to become the loom for everyone else. The weaver is meant to serve the pattern without self-erasure. So I wanted to talk about some different types of weavers, because there are different subtypes and some souls carry more than one, but these distinctions help to map the framework more specifically. So number one, you have the inner weavers. These weavers work primarily within the psyche and soul field of individuals, and their domain is internal coherence. They help weave the inner archetypes, the shadow self, the inner child, the conscious identity, the past selves, and how they all overlap into the present direction. They work with grief and expression and desire and discernment, and they may use tools such as dialogue, ritual, reflection, and witnessing in order to master the art of internal integration. The next type of weavers are relational weavers, and these weavers perceive the threads between people. They read the emotional, ancestral, karmic, and communicative structures within relationships, and they weave between rupture and repair. They weave between misunderstanding and truth. They weave soul contracts and mutual lessons, and they help move towards healthy boundaries and authentic closeness. Their specialty is repairing or clarifying the weave between beings. Then there are narrative weavers who work through story, language, teaching, testimony, and myth. They understand that narrative shapes reality because it organizes meaning and identity and possibility, and they help weave personal story into a truthful shape. They take fragmented experiences and form them into meaning. They take collective confusion and clarify it with language. And they also harness the archetypal truths into story forms that people can metabolize. Their specialty is language as a living loom. Then there are ritual weavers. These weavers build containers because they know that transformation stabilizes with form. They create symbolic acts and rhythms and ceremonies and embodied practices that help consciousness anchor change. Their gift is weaving intention and embodiment and bringing inner movement into outer action. Dreamweavers are those who work in symbolic and liminal and imaginary spaces. They read dreams, they travel through the astral realm, they encounter archetypes and work with subconscious imagery as part of their weave. So they work to weave waking life and dreaming life, and they blend together the psyche and symbols, and they bring hidden material into conscious understanding. So the specialty of the dream weavers is the liminal field. The next type of weaver is the type of weaver that I most identify with, and I call them threshold weavers. These are the specialists in the periods of crossing, and they often show up when someone is neither who they were nor yet who they are becoming. They help weave the endings into beginnings and the disorientation into initiation, and they reorganize after collapse. So the specialty of the threshold weavers is stabilizing the in-between. Then you have collective weavers who perceive systems, eras, and cultural narratives, and they are not only sensitive to individual pain, but they are extremely attuned to the architecture of the entire collective. They are the ones who are leading the weave from social rupture into a new sense of belonging. They take fractured discourse and they weave it with deeper truth. They weave spiritual insight into cultural language, and ultimately, they are the ones leading the pack into mending the collective shadow back into consciousness. They work beyond the personal scale, and they are the ultimate big picture weavers. Then you have ancestral weavers. These weavers feel the longer thread, and they perceive inherited wounds, blessings, unfinished stories, and cultural patterns that have been passed on across generations. And they weave the inherited pain into conscious grief, things that have been forgotten and left out over timelines and lifetimes. They take the ancestral gifts and make them into practical uses. They witness what was silenced for years and lifetimes and generations, and they turn that repetition into liberation. So the gift of the ancestral weavers is to heal the lineage through remembrance and repatterning. The last type of weaver I will talk about is the embodiment weavers, and these are the weavers that understand that no true weaving is complete until it reaches the body. These are the weavers that are extremely grounded and in tune with their material selves. They focus on regulation, sensation, habit. They nourish themselves, they know how to rest, and they take pride in the daily practice. They help weave insights into habit and safety into the nervous system, and their specialty is making the weave livable. So let me talk about the different types of weaving, because there are different perspectives from which you can view this type of work. So number one is shadow weaving. And this is the art of bringing disowned and distorted material back into conscious relation without letting it take the throne. This involves identifying what has been rejected and listening to the unmet need or original wound beneath the pattern. It also involves separating essence from distortion and integrating the life force trapped inside the shadow material. So this is not an act of indulgence or repression, it is an act of contact with discernment. Shadow weaving is asking what part was exiled and what gift is trapped inside that part, and how can it be returned to rightful relation. Number two, there is light weaving. Light weaving is when you work with the gifts, vision, and purpose and desire and inspired devotion and higher order coherence. But when you do this work, you do so without bypassing shadow. This work involves amplifying what is true and life-giving, helping others recognize their gifts without inflation, stabilizing inspiration through form, and building trust in what is emerging. Light weaving isn't about hype, it's the careful strengthening of what is alive and real. Then there's thread weaving, which is identifying and working with the specific threads moving through your life or field. And these threads are endless. It could be the grief thread, the creative thread, the exile thread, the body thread, the ancestral thread. The weaver senses which threads are active and tangled, and which ones are starved, which ones are overextended, which ones have split, or which ones are ready to be followed. Thread weaving asks which thread is currently asking to be remembered and which thread is currently structuring my pattern, and what happens if a particular thread is strengthened, loosened, cut, or rerouted. The next type of weaving is narrative weaving, and this is the restructuring of meaning through language. It is truthful re-articulation, like reframing. A person may be living inside a false narrative, such as, I am too late, my pain ruined me, receiving is dangerous, visibility leads to harm. Narrative weaving helps uncover the deeper pattern and create language that reflects reality more truly. So it's not just fantasy and positive thinking, but it's changing the architecture of your thoughts. Then we have energetic weaving, And within my framework, this refers to sensing and adjusting the relational patterns of forces within your field. And this may involve identifying leaks and chords, distortions and echoes, noticing where energy is fragmented or overbound, strengthening your boundaries, restoring rightful flow, and calling scattered energy back into integrity. This kind of weaving needs caution, humility, and groundedness, or it can become like projection theater. So just use caution when doing energy work. Another type of weaving is ritual weaving, and this is when symbolic action is used to anchor a shift. Ritual weaving translates invisible movement into visible form, and this can include candle work for release or blessings, threshold crossings, object consecration, cleansing and anointing, writing and burning old vows, altar building, and things of that nature. It works because the psyche and body often need gesture to believe what consciousness has already chosen. It brings the, unspoken intention into physical form, thus making it real. The next type of weaving is relational weaving, and this is the art of tending the pattern between selves. This includes truth telling with care, repairing breaches, and ending entanglement without hatred, distinguishing intuition from projection, and identifying what belongs to who and recognizing soul lessons without romanticizing harm. Relational weaving is especially important because many distortions live not in isolated individuals but in interactions. Then you have dream weaving. This is the integration of dream material into waking coherence. So this can be done by tracking your dreams, so this can be done by tracking your dreams and reading the symbols and keeping track of the recurring places and figures and identifying initiatory dreams. Also, it can be done with discerning shadow figures, and also maybe guides and mirrors and other archetypes within the symbolic logic of your dreams. The most important part of dream weaving is applying the dream insight into your waking practice. It helps the subconscious and conscious mind stop speaking past each other. Then you have material weaving, and this is where the spiritual becomes practical. This has to do with money, schedules, health routines, environment, your home, your clothes, and your stewardship of time. These are all parts of the material weave. And it matters because abundance without a container collapses. So material weaving includes building sustainable routines, creating systems that hold your work, and aligning your spending with your values. It also involves curating your physical environment, tending to the body as an act of sacred purpose. This is one of the most mature forms of weaving because it proves the pattern can survive contact with ordinary life. So now let me get into the process of weaving, how it's done, and I'm going to break it into stages, but please keep in mind that a real weaving process usually has more time between the stages, and it's not usually this cut and dry. It's usually like an evolved process. So the first stage is attunement, and that is when the weaver first begins to listen and not forces an answer, but perceives the pattern that exists. So this might be done through silence and stillness, body sensations, intuitive noticing, symbolic observation, and just identifying recurrences and tracking your emotional communication. Stage 2 is discernment. Not everything felt is true, and not every intense impression is meaningful. So the weaver separates the signal from the noise, and the fear from the intuition, and the projection from the perception. Stage 3 is naming. Once the pattern becomes clearer, it is named. And when you name the pattern, it's powerful because the unnamed often governs in secret. When you name a thread and give it a identity, it makes the thread feel important. And this is personifying the work, but it's true. When you name the thread and give it an identity, it feels welcomed and it feels validated. So, for example, some threads that you could name could be like, you could say, this is an abandonment loop, or this is a severance response, or this is a threshold fear, or this is an internal shame thread. When you name it, you give shape to something that was previously working in an invisible way. Number 4 is locating the thread, and that's when you identify and determine what exactly the active thread is and where is it rooted, what is it connected to. The thread could be traced to childhood experiences, it could be traced ancestrally, or a past relational pattern, an identity wound, or a combination of multiple. The weaver identifies what is central rather than trying to solve everything at once. It's basically finding the common ground. Stage 5 is where you choose the intervention. Different patterns need different actions. Some threads need strengthening while some need softening. Some need witnessing and some need structure and some need boundary. This is where the type of weaving is chosen. For stage 6, repatterning happens, and this is where new relation is actually practiced. So you begin to implement the new thread and weave it into the old thread. This could be changing your language, creating a ritual, altering your behavior, or reorganizing your space. The key is that repatterning is not just providing insight, it is enacting the coherence. Just because you have identified an energetic opening does not mean that you've completed the transformation. The new pattern must be reinforced. So stabilization may require repetition, simplicity, rest, boundaries, tracking triggers, and letting the body catch up. A true weave is one that actually holds. A crucial thing to differentiate is the difference between true weaving and false weaving. True weaving increases coherence, deepens embodiment, restores choice, strengthens discernment, and honors complexity. It helps the person become more internally sourced. Whereas false weaving flatters spiritual ego, intensifies confusion, creates dependence on the weaver, and oversymbolizes everything. It keeps people ungrounded and porous. A true weaver does not just make someone feel mystical, a true weaver helps them become more coherent. To give you one final structuring image about the loom itself, I'm gonna explain it like this. The loom is the set of conditions that allows threads to become a pattern. So within my framework, the loom can be thought of as the body, the nervous system, language, ritual container, daily life, sacred attention, and the field of source itself. Without a loom, the threads stay loose, and without threads, the loom stays empty. Without discernment, the pattern tangles, and without devotion, the pattern does not hold. The weaver's task is to listen for the pattern that wants to become visible and then participate in its emergence with humility, precision, and care. I hope that this video brought you some insight and clarity on what a weaver is, and if you're interested in learning more about my work, please feel free to explore the links in my bio. I also wanted to mention that I've launched a crowdfunding campaign to support the foundation and stability of my business and brand. If you'd like to contribute, it would mean the world to me, and it is also linked in my bio. Thanks again for watching, and stay sovereign.